The first person to draw Kang Soo-hyun in America was his son. Jaden sat in the back corner of Naomi's second-grade classroom with a box of worn crayons between his knees and his tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth in concentration. The school day was over. The hallways had quieted down. The last school bus had already pulled away from the curb. But Naomi was still there, like she always was, helping one student finish a reading worksheet, tying another child's shoelace, packing leftover snacks into plastic bags so no one would go home hungry. She was the kind of teacher people trusted without needing a reason. Parents asked for her by name. Children who struggled in every other room seemed to breathe easier around her. The school secretary said Naomi had the patience of a saint. The principal said she was the kind of teacher who kept the school together when everything else felt underfunded and overworked. And the kids simply loved her because she never made them feel small. Now, with the classroom finally empty except for her son, Naomi stacked papers into neat piles and glanced over at Jaden. He was 5 years old, with straight dark hair, thoughtful eyes, and a face that made strangers pause for just half a second before they looked at Naomi and quietly did the math in their heads. He had features Naomi never explained and questions she was always trying to outrun. "What are you drawing, baby?" she asked, softening her voice the way she always did with him. Jaden held up the page proudly. It was a man. Tall, dark coat, sharp eyes, serious face. Underneath the drawing, in big, careful letters, he had written one word. Daddy. Naomi went still. Not visibly. Not enough for a child to notice. But inside her, something old and buried shifted like a locked door being pushed from the other side. "Why did you draw that?" she asked, walking over slowly. Jaden shrugged with the innocent cruelty only children have, the kind that comes from honesty. "I don't know. I just think maybe he looks like me." Naomi crouched in front of him and smiled, because mothers learn how to smile through pain long before anyone gives them credit for it. "Maybe," she said. He looked at her closely. "Mommy, do I have a daddy?" Every muscle in her body wanted to lie down and disappear. But Naomi had been disappearing for years. She had gotten good at doing it while standing right in front of people. "Everybody has a daddy," she said gently, brushing a thumb across his cheek. "Some stories just take longer to tell." Jaden seemed satisfied with that, or at least willing to let it go for now. He returned to his crayons. Naomi picked up the drawing with careful fingers and stared at the serious eyes he had drawn. Eyes he had never seen in person. Eyes she had once loved so much she had crossed a city for them. Eyes she had later fled across an ocean to escape. And if this kind of secret-heavy, emotionally dangerous love story is exactly why you're here, this is the moment to subscribe to Afro-Korea Ruthless Love Stories, because Naomi's past is not buried. It is already on its way back to her. Naomi's life in Atlanta was small by design. She had chosen a neighborhood where nothing dramatic happened, a school where people minded their business, an apartment building where the walls were thin enough to hear somebody's television but thick enough to keep your history to yourself. Her life ran on routine because routine was safe. Morning alarms, packed lunches, phonics lessons, grocery runs, bedtime baths, bills on the counter, laundry folded on the couch, a child's laugh drifting out of a kitchen that smelled like sesame oil and garlic. At home, she and Jaden had rituals that didn't make sense to anyone else. She read him Korean bedtime stories from children's books with bent corners and handwritten notes in the margins. She cooked him soft rice, seaweed soup, egg rolls, kimchi fried rice when he was brave enough for the spice. She spoke certain Korean words without thinking: sleep now, eat, careful, good boy. And every time she heard them leave her mouth, she felt like she was pulling memories through her teeth. Jaden accepted these things the way children accept weather. To him, his mother's stories were just stories. His food was just food. Her silence was just the shape of home. But adults noticed. Naomi's older sister, Alicia, noticed most of all. One Sunday evening, Alicia stood in Naomi's kitchen with a glass of iced tea in one hand and one eyebrow raised halfway to heaven, while Jaden lined up toy cars on the floor. "You gonna tell me why my nephew eats better Korean food than I do?" Alicia asked. Naomi didn't look up from the stove. "Because I love him." Alicia snorted. "You know what I mean." Naomi stirred the soup. "No, I know what you keep asking. I keep asking because people keep asking me." Alicia leaned on the counter. "Nay, that boy is getting older. He's going to ask more questions. And I'm not trying to be messy, But the man in that child's face is not exactly invisible. Naomi set the spoon down too hard. The sound clicked sharply against the pot. Jaden looked up. Naomi immediately softened. Finish parking those cars, baby. He nodded and went back to playing. Alicia lowered her voice. I'm not your enemy. Naomi closed her eyes for a second. I know. Then why do you act like saying his father's name will burn the house down? Because maybe it would, Naomi thought. Instead, she reached for bowls and said, because some men should stay where they were left. Alicia watched her sister's face and saw something there she had seen only a few times before. Not shame, not heartbreak, but fear. Real fear. The kind that does not fade with time because time never actually solved it. Alicia let it drop, at least out loud. But when she sat down to dinner and watched Jaden laugh over spilled rice while Naomi corrected his chopstick grip with automatic tenderness, she understood one thing clearly. Naomi was not hiding a heartbreak. She was hiding a history. If you were Naomi's sister, would you keep pushing for the truth, or would you leave it alone? Comment below, because this family secret is sitting right at the center of everything. 5 years earlier, Naomi had not yet learned how to be afraid of beautiful things. Back then, she had arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases, a student visa, and the kind of bright, open curiosity that made every street feel like a promise. She was studying abroad for a teaching and language program, but the truth was she had wanted more than credits. She had wanted distance, adventure, a city big enough to let her become a version of herself nobody back home already knew. Seoul gave her all of that. It gave her cold mornings and bright convenience stores. It gave her subway maps she could barely read and cafes that stayed open past midnight. It gave her gallery nights in neighborhoods strung with tiny lights, markets that smelled like grilled meat and sweet dough, rooftops where the whole city glittered like it was daring people not to fall in love under it. Naomi did not plan to meet anyone, especially not him. The gallery opening had been too crowded and too polished, full of people whose clothes looked expensive in ways she didn't yet know how to identify. Naomi was standing near a wall of abstract photographs, pretending she understood more than she did when a man stepped beside her and said, in flawless English, "If you stare at it long enough, everyone will assume you belong here." She looked at him and forgot the photograph entirely. He was dressed simply, but simplicity fit him like power. Dark suit, no tie, clean watch, a face too controlled to be casual and too handsome to be harmless. His eyes were the kind that seemed still even when the room around them moved. Naomi smiled before she could stop herself. Does that trick work? It depends, he said. Do you belong here? Tonight? No. Good, he replied. Neither do I. That was the first lie Soo-hyun ever told her. Or maybe the smallest. He introduced himself as Kang Soo-hyun, a businessman. He did not say what kind. He did not say men lowered their heads when he entered a room. He did not say entire districts in Seoul whispered his name carefully. He did not say that his empire ran through shipping, clubs, construction fronts, private security firms, and darker channels nobody put in writing. He did not say that the blood under his shoes had been professionally cleaned many times before they met. With Naomi, he said only enough to seem ordinary. And with Naomi, something impossible happened. He wanted to be. Their connection moved too fast to be safe and too deep to be casual. In 3 months, she learned the shape of his silence, the rare curve of his laughter, the way he loosened around her as if she opened a locked room inside him nobody else had found. He learned that she talked with her hands when she was excited, that she cried at animated movies, that she hated being patronized, that she could turn cheap street food into a memory he would carry for years. They met in secret, though Naomi thought the secrecy was romantic. Rooftop dinners under strings of lights. Walks along the Han River with coffee gone cold in their hands. Late drives through neon streets while he told her half-true stories about his childhood. A rainy night under one umbrella where he kissed her so slowly she forgot every warning she had ever been given about intense men with unreadable faces. He never brought her fully into his world. At the time, she thought that was gentleness. In hindsight, she understood it was compartmentalization. Still, he gave her moments so tender they felt holy. He once took her to a rooftop no one else was allowed to use and cooked ramen for her himself because she had complained that wealthy men never did anything with their own hands. He burned the eggs. She laughed so hard she cried. He stared at her for a long second and said, You laugh like you've never expected anyone to keep trying. She had looked away. Maybe I didn't. He had touched her face with surprising care. I would. For a while, she believed him. The night everything changed began like any other secret date. He had taken her to a private dinner above a downtown building. The city spread beneath them in endless lights. He was quieter than usual, answering messages between courses, his jaw tightening every time his phone vibrated. Naomi noticed, but she was still in love enough to turn concern into patience. Bad night at work? She asked. There is no good night at work, he said. She smiled. That sounds dramatic. He looked at her across the candlelight, and for one fleeting moment, whatever mask he wore with the rest of the world slipped. You have no idea. Near midnight, his phone rang again. He answered in Korean. Naomi didn't catch every word, but she caught enough to hear how quickly his tone changed. Cold. Direct. Absolute. He stood. I need 10 minutes. I can wait. I know, he said, then touched her shoulder. Stay here. He went downstairs. Naomi tried to be good. She really did. But 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 30. The staff had vanished. The rooftop wind had turned sharp. Her worry swelled into something uneasy and shapeless. When she finally went looking for him, she told herself she was only checking whether he was all right. She found the wrong door. Or maybe the truth found her. Below the rooftop, through a service corridor and down a private stairwell, she heard voices in a concrete loading area behind the building. Men's voices. Hard, clipped, tense. Naomi stopped at the corner, unseen. Soo-hyun stood under a harsh white light, with 4 men around him. Another man was on his knees. Naomi's mind tried to reject what it was seeing even before it understood it. The kneeling man's face was bruised. One of the others held him by the shoulder. Nobody looked shocked. Nobody looked uncertain. The air itself felt practiced. The kneeling man said something desperate in Korean. Naomi caught only fragments. Please. Family. Mistake. Soo-hyun listened without expression. Then he gave an order. 2 words. Quiet. Final. One of the men lifted a gun. Naomi stopped breathing. She did not see the body fall because she turned away before the shot. But the sound split the world anyway. The echo slammed into her bones. She pressed both hands over her mouth to keep from screaming, backed up blindly, and nearly stumbled on the stairs. Her heart beat so violently she thought it would expose her. By the time she reached the street, she was shaking so hard she could not fit her key into the lock of her apartment door. She packed before sunrise. She changed flights twice. She withdrew cash. She bought a ticket with money she had been saving for travel and left Seoul before noon. She did not tell him goodbye. She did not answer the calls that flooded her phone. She did not look back from the plane window. 2 weeks later, back in Atlanta, she stared at a pregnancy test in her bathroom and understood that she had not escaped alone. She told no one the father's name. She kept the Korean books anyway. Because love, she learned, did not die just because fear was stronger. Sometimes it stayed alive in strange little ways. In recipes, in language, in lullabies, in a child's face. And if Naomi running that night felt justified to you, hit like on this video and tell the truth in the comments. Would you have stayed, or would you have disappeared too? For 5 years, Naomi managed the impossible. She built a life sturdy enough to hold her son and quiet enough not to attract attention. She used no social media except under a false name. She never posted Jaden's face online. She changed apartments twice. She kept work and home close. She never spoke Soo-hyun's name out loud, as if silence itself were a protective spell. And for 5 years, it worked. Until one old photograph ruined everything. It happened on a Thursday night. Rain tapped softly at the apartment windows while Naomi folded laundry on the couch, and Jaden dumped a box of crayons across the rug. He was looking for the silver one, the special sword color, as he called it. In the process, he pulled open the lower drawer of a side table Naomi rarely used. Inside was a small envelope. She saw it in his hand too late. What's this? He asked. Nothing, baby. Just old things. But he had already slid the photograph halfway out. Naomi crossed the room so fast, she almost tripped over a toy truck. Jaden held the picture up between 2 small fingers. A rooftop. String lights. Night sky. Seoul in the background, shining and far below. Naomi, younger and brighter, laughing with her head thrown back. Beside her stood a man with one hand in his pocket and the other around her waist, looking at her like the rest of the city did not exist. "Mommy," Jaden said slowly, studying the image. "Who is the man in this picture?" Naomi felt the blood leave her face. For a second, she could not hear the rain anymore. She could only hear an old gunshot echoing up a concrete stairwell. She took the photo, but gently. "He's someone I knew a long time ago." Jaden frowned. "Is he my daddy?" Children had a way of walking straight through lies toward truth. Naomi opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Jaden tilted his head. "He looks like my drawing." She sat down hard on the edge of the couch. "Who told you that?" "Nobody. I just think so." And that was somehow worse. That night, after she put Jaden to bed and listened to his breathing settle into sleep, Naomi sat alone at the kitchen table with the old photograph in front of her. The apartment was dim. The clock on the microwave glowed past midnight. The rain had stopped. Every sound from the hallway made her lift her head. She took out a notebook. At first, she only meant to write a name. But once her pen touched paper, years poured out of her like blood from a reopened wound. She wrote about fear. About the night she saw what he truly was. About the child sleeping in the next room. A boy who loved seaweed soup and drew serious-eyed men from memory he did not possess. She wrote about how much she had hated Soo-hyun for making her love him before revealing the monster beneath the man. She wrote about how much worse it was that part of her had never fully stopped missing the version of him that had burned eggs on a rooftop and watched her laugh like it meant something. She wrote, "I never wanted you to know this way." She wrote, "I chose his safety over your right to him." She wrote, "I do not know if that makes me cruel or just a mother." And in a line that made her hand tremble so badly, she almost scratched through the page, she wrote, "Some nights I still hear your voice before I sleep, and I hate myself for that too." When she finished, Naomi folded the pages and slipped them into an envelope she never intended to mail. She placed the envelope in her school tote bag. The next morning, she brought it to work, thinking maybe she would destroy it during her planning period. Burn it, shred it, rip it into pieces so tiny even memory could not reconstruct it. But life in an elementary school did what it always did. It moved too fast for private collapse. A child vomited on the reading carpet. A parent forgot a lunchbox. The principal needed lesson plans. A copier jammed. By noon, Naomi had forgotten the letter was even in her bag. Ms. Park did not. Mina Park taught music 2 classrooms down. Quiet, precise, unfailingly polite. She had worked at the school for less than a year, and Naomi liked her in that careful coworker way people liked kind colleagues without knowing their full stories. Ms. Park spoke Korean under her breath when she was stressed. She brought homemade pastries to staff meetings. She once helped Jaden tie the sash on a cultural festival costume and smiled at him with a softness that was almost strange. Late that afternoon, Ms. Park stepped into Naomi's empty classroom to return a folder and saw the envelope sitting half exposed on the desk, one page pulled loose. She probably would have looked away. Then she saw the name, Kang Soo-hyun. The color drained from her face. Slowly, she set the folder down. She read just enough to understand what the letter was and who it was for. Her gaze moved to the crayon drawing lying beside it, the one Naomi had brought from home and forgotten under a stack of graded papers. On the back, in childish letters, Jaden had written, "Daddy." Ms. Park stood very still. Then she took out her phone. One photograph of the first page. Another of the signature. Another of the crayon drawing. She hesitated. Then she photographed everything. An hour later, standing in her car in the far corner of the parking lot, she sent those images to a contact she had not spoken to in years. Her message contained only one sentence. "I think this belongs to your boss." By the time Naomi remembered the letter and stuffed it back into her bag that evening, it was already too late. In Seoul, 5 years had made Kang Soo-hyun harder to kill and easier to fear. Power had settled over him the way winter settles over a city. Silent, relentless, indisputable. Men who once challenged him now worked for him or were buried because of him. His criminal network had widened in ways so sophisticated they barely looked criminal from the outside. Legitimate businesses covered illegitimate flows. Diplomats attended his charity events. Politicians denied knowing him. Police investigations stalled, shifted, or quietly vanished. And yet none of it had made him happier. Director Yoon knew that better than anyone. Yoon had served him long enough to remember the months before Naomi disappeared. He remembered a boss who had begun leaving meetings early, A boss who had once smiled at his phone like a young fool after reading a message. A boss who had stood on the rooftop of one of their buildings at 2 in the morning staring at the city as if he had finally found a reason to want more from it than control. He also remembered what happened after she vanished. The search. Not loud. Not public. But relentless. Airport manifests. Bank activity. Apartment records. University contacts. Private investigators paid to fail quietly. Soo-hyun never said her name more than necessary, but Yoon saw the fracture she left behind. It was the only wound the man carried that no violence had caused. Now, 5 years later, Soo-hyun sat behind a sleek black desk in an office overlooking the Han River. The city was dark and glittering below him. His suit was flawless. His expression was unreadable. On the desk, beside closed files and a crystal glass he had not touched, stood one framed photograph. Naomi laughing on a rooftop. Nobody commented on it. Nobody was stupid enough. Yoon stepped into the office with a folder and found his boss staring not at the skyline, not at the files, but at the photograph. You could have anyone, Yoon said carefully, because he was one of the only men alive allowed to risk honesty. Why keep mourning someone who left? Soo-hyun did not look up. I don't want anyone. Yoon almost answered, but a knock interrupted him. A courier had arrived. No return address. No name. Just a sealed envelope hand-delivered through 3 layers of security by a man who apparently had no idea what he was carrying. Yoon took it first, checked it, then placed it on the desk. Soo-hyun glanced at it with mild irritation. Random messages usually bored him. Threats bored him more. He slipped the envelope open. The first page came out folded. Then the drawing. His fingers stopped moving. Yoon saw the change immediately. A barely visible tightening in the jaw. A stillness too deep to be ordinary. The kind of stillness that came before rage, grief, or death. Soo-hyun unfolded the letter. He read the first line. He did not blink for a very long time. Yoon said nothing. He watched his boss read every page in absolute silence. Watched his eyes move slower near the end. Watched his hand curl more tightly around the paper when he reached the lines about the child. Watched him look down at the crayon drawing afterward as if the paper itself might detonate. Daddy. The letters were clumsy. Innocent. World-ending. Something in Soo-hyun's face changed, but not into softness. It was stranger than that. More dangerous. A man who had accepted one kind of emptiness suddenly being handed a reason to feel again. Sir. Yoon asked quietly. Soo-hyun looked at the photo of Naomi on his desk, then at the boy's drawing, then back at the letter. When he finally spoke, his voice was so calm it chilled the room more than a shout ever could. Find her. That was all. Within minutes, phones were active across 3 countries. If you are already bracing for the reunion, subscribe now to Afro-Korea Ruthless Love Stories, because this is exactly where hidden pasts stop being memories and start becoming consequences. They found Naomi in less than 48 hours. Atlanta, Georgia. Elementary school teacher. Single mother. No husband. No public records listing the father. 2-bedroom apartment. Routine established. Child enrolled at the same school where she worked. When Director Yoon brought the file into the private conference room, Soo-hyun was already waiting. Yoon laid out photographs one by one. Naomi carrying grocery bags. Naomi unlocking a classroom door. Naomi kneeling to zip a child's coat. Naomi exiting the school with a little boy beside her. That was the one. Yoon slid it closest. The boy was laughing as he ran across a schoolyard, backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The photo had been taken from a distance, but distance did nothing to soften the resemblance. The eyes, the line of the mouth, the shape of the face. It was like seeing the past reduced to childhood. Yoon zoomed in on a tablet version and drew in a breath. Soo-hyun said nothing. He stared. For a long time, he did not even touch the screen. He only looked at the little boy as if he were trying to understand how something that belonged to him could have existed for 5 years without his knowing. Age, he asked. 5, said Yoon. Soo-hyun's gaze flickered once. 5 years. Exactly. He looked at Naomi's photo next. She was older now, of course. Tired in ways she had not been before. Stronger too. There was more steel in her posture. More caution in the set of her shoulders. But it was still Naomi. Still the woman who had once smiled at him like he was not already lost. Do you want her brought here? Yoon asked. Soo-hyun leaned back. His answer came immediately. Book me a flight, he said. Yoon waited. Tonight. The private jet cut through the dark over the Pacific while Soo-hyun sat alone and did not sleep. He held the drawing once during the flight, flattening the wrinkled paper against the table with unusual care. He did not know what anger was allowed to do with tenderness. He did not know what to call the ache inside his chest except that it was older than the letter and sharper than the betrayal. A son. His son. Hidden from him. Protected from him. Maybe both. He thought of Naomi writing that letter in fear. He thought of the night she vanished. He thought of all the years he had told himself he wanted answers when what he had really wanted was her. Now fate had delivered both, wrapped together so tightly he could not pull them apart. In Atlanta, Naomi felt danger before she saw it. The warning came as she was erasing the board after lunch. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Spam calls were common. Parent emergencies were common too. She answered on the second ring with absent professional warmth. "Hello, this is Ms. Naomi." The voice on the other end was female, low and urgent. "He knows." Naomi froze. The dry erase marker slipped from her hand and hit the floor. "Who is this?" she whispered. "Run." The line went dead. Naomi stood motionless in front of her classroom as children's laughter echoed from somewhere down the hallway. For one terrifying second, her mind tried to pretend it could mean something else. A prank. A mistake. Wrong number. Then she felt it. That old, unmistakable terror she had carried out of Seoul inside her own bones. She grabbed her bag, told the front office there was a family emergency, and walked, too fast to be calm, too controlled to be called panic, to the kindergarten room where Jaden was building a block tower. "Mommy," he said, smiling. "Why are you here early?" "We're going on an adventure," she said, already lifting his backpack. He cheered because children hear adventure where adults hear escape. Naomi drove without fully knowing where she was going. Alicia's house? The airport? A motel off the highway? Somewhere crowded? Somewhere anonymous? Every option felt too slow, too exposed, too late. She circled back to the apartment only because she needed clothes, passports, cash. 10 minutes, she told herself. In and out. But when she turned onto her street, her hands locked on the steering wheel. 3 black SUVs were parked outside her building. Engines idling. Doors closed. Windows tinted. Naomi's breath caught, so hard it hurt. "No," she whispered. Jaden sat up straighter in the back seat. "Mommy." And then she saw him. Kang Soo-hyun stood in the middle of the street, as if the city itself had made room for him. He wore a dark overcoat despite the Atlanta heat, his posture straight, his face unreadable. Men remained behind him near the vehicles, disciplined and silent, but he stood alone. No shouting, no show of force, no chaos. That made it worse, because chaos could be resisted. This kind of control had crossed an ocean on purpose. Naomi's pulse thundered in her ears. She could still leave. Throw the car in reverse. Run the light. Drive until the tank went dry. But Jaden had already seen him. The little boy pressed a hand to the window and stared with open curiosity. Then he turned to Naomi and whispered the words that made her blood go cold. "Mommy, that man looks like the picture. If that line hit you in the chest, stay with this story, because the next few moments change everything." Naomi stepped out of the car on shaking legs. The sun was low, turning the apartment windows gold. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A neighbor glanced through curtains and then disappeared. The world had the audacity to remain ordinary while hers was splitting open. She opened the back door and helped Jaden down, then moved in front of him instinctively, one arm stretched protectively behind her. Soo-hyun began walking toward them. Slowly. His men stayed back. Every step felt deliberate, like he understood that if he moved too fast, the entire moment would shatter. Naomi had imagined this confrontation more times than she wanted to admit. In some versions, he was furious. In others, cold. In her darkest nightmares, he did not come himself at all. He simply sent men to take what he believed was his. She had never imagined this. Him walking toward her, as if the years between them were alive and dangerous, and he knew it. He stopped several feet away, close enough for her to see what time had done to him. It had sharpened him, not softened him. His face was harder. His shoulders carried more command. But his eyes were the same. Or maybe that was the cruelest part. Naomi's voice came out tight. "Don't come any closer." He obeyed. That alone unsettled her. Then his gaze shifted. Past her. To Jaden. The little boy leaned around Naomi's side to look back at him, not frightened, only intensely curious. Children sometimes sense danger. Sometimes they sensed longing even faster. Soo-hyun stared as if language itself had failed him. Jaden blinked once, studying the stranger with the earnest seriousness only 5-year-olds could summon. Then he tilted his head. "Are you my daddy?" he asked. "You look like my drawing." Naomi closed her eyes for one broken second. When she opened them, Soo-hyun's expression had changed. Not much, just enough. The coldness did not vanish. Men like him did not transform because a child asked a question. But something cracked beneath it, a faint fracture in the armor, visible only because she had once known the man underneath. He swallowed once. "What's your name?" he asked, and even that sounded unfamiliar in his own mouth. "Jaden." Soo-hyun repeated it quietly, like he was testing the weight of it. "Jaden." The boy stepped half a pace forward before Naomi caught his shoulder. "Stay with me," she said. Soo-hyun looked at her then, fully, and whatever softness had flickered was replaced by years of unanswered pain. "You ran," he said. Naomi laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You ordered a man killed." His jaw tightened. "You saw one night and decided you knew all of me. I saw enough. And you hid my son. I protected my child." The men by the SUVs shifted almost imperceptibly, but nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. Even they seemed to understand they were standing inside something larger than any of them. Jaden looked from one adult to the other, sensing emotion without understanding its shape. "Mommy," he said softly. Naomi crouched beside him without taking her eyes off Soo-hyun. "Go upstairs to Auntie Alicia's apartment, remember? Apartment 2B. Use the side stairs. I don't want to leave you." "I know." She touched his cheek. "But I need you to be brave for me." He looked at Soo-hyun again, then back at Naomi, then nodded the reluctant nod of a child obeying because love asked him to. One of Soo-hyun's men moved slightly as if to escort him. Soo-hyun lifted a hand without looking back. The man froze. No one touched the boy. Jaden ran up the side stairs, backpack bouncing, and disappeared into the building. Only then did Naomi let herself breathe again. Only then did Soo-hyun step closer. Not too close, but enough that the years between them felt less like time and more like a knife. Inside Naomi's apartment, the air was thick with all the life she had built without him. Tiny shoes by the door, school papers on the fridge, a dinosaur cup in the sink, the faint scent of rice and lavender detergent. A children's book in Korean lay open on the couch, one page bent where it had been left mid-story. Soo-hyun stood in the center of the living room and looked around with an expression Naomi could not quite read. This was the life she had chosen instead of him. This ordinary, tender, hidden life. "You taught him Korean," he said. Naomi crossed her arms. "A little. You cooked our food for him. He likes it. You kept parts of me." She almost laughed again, but this time it hurt too much. "Don't flatter yourself. I kept what didn't have blood on it." For the first time since arriving, anger flashed openly across his face. "You think I came here to be insulted?" "No," she said. "I think you came here because someone finally handed you what you believed belonged to you." His eyes narrowed. "Belong? You said it, not me." He looked away for a brief second, reining himself in with visible effort. "When did you plan to tell him?" he asked. "I didn't know." "That is not an answer. It's the only one I have." Silence stretched. Naomi could hear a child running in the apartment upstairs, a faucet turning on next door, her own heartbeat. Finally, she said the thing that had burned inside her for 5 years. "I saw what you are." His gaze snapped back to hers. "I saw your men. I saw that man on his knees. I heard the shot." Her voice shook now, but she did not care. "Do you understand what that did to me? I loved you. I loved a lie. And then in one night I realized that if I stayed, if I told you about the baby, if I let you into our lives, I would be raising a child in the shadow of men who solved problems with guns." Soo-hyun's face went still in that dangerous way again. "You made that choice for both of us. I made it for him." His voice dropped. "He is mine too." Naomi stepped closer. "Blood is not the same as safety, and fear is not the same as righteousness." That landed because it was not entirely false. Naomi looked away first. He saw it, and softened only by a degree. "Why the letter?" Her throat tightened. "It wasn't supposed to reach you." "But you wrote it." "Yes." "Why?" She could have lied again. God knew she had enough practice. Instead, maybe because he was standing in the middle of the small apartment she had built from ruin. Maybe because the truth had finally caught up to them anyway. she answered honestly. Because I was tired, she said. Because he asked me who you were. Because I saw his face next to yours and realized silence doesn't erase anything. Because some part of me, she stopped. Soo-hyun waited. When she spoke again, the words were quieter. Some part of me wanted you to know there was something in this world you had made that wasn't destruction. He absorbed that in silence. Then, with a kind of restraint that frightened her more than fury, he said, You think I came for the boy because I want an heir. Naomi lifted her chin. Don't pretend that isn't part of this. He is my blood, Soo-hyun said. My son, my heir. I will not walk away. There it was. The steal. The claim. The part of him that had built empires by deciding what would and would not be taken from him. Naomi's answer came without hesitation. Then you'll have to go through me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. One of the men outside the door shifted, reading the tension wrong. Soo-hyun turned his head slightly and said, Stay out. The apartment fell silent again. He looked back at Naomi differently now. Still angry. Still betrayed. But beneath it, there was something else she had not expected to see from him again. Respect. Because she had taken his rage and not stepped back. Because she had raised his son alone and kept the child safe. Because she was still, infuriatingly, the one person who looked at him and refused to be impressed by power when she had seen what it cost. Jaden reappeared then, slipping back downstairs before Alicia could stop him. He ran into the apartment with a blanket tucked under one arm and froze when he realized the adults were still standing in the same hard circle of silence. Naomi turned immediately. Jaden, I told you to stay upstairs. I wanted my dinosaur blanket. Her anger broke on contact with his smallness. Before she could move, Jaden looked at Soo-hyun and held the blanket tighter. Are you mad? The question hit the room harder than any threat. Soo-hyun looked at the child for a long second. Then he answered with more care than Naomi had ever heard from him in front of witnesses. No. Jaden considered that. Okay. He walked over to the couch, climbed up, and sat with the blanket in his lap, as if men appearing from Korea and announcing themselves as possible fathers was strange but survivable so long as one had a familiar couch. The absurd tenderness of it nearly broke Naomi. Soo-hyun watched the boy settle in, watched the way he rubbed the edge of the blanket between thumb and forefinger, watched the wary protective glance he kept throwing toward Naomi. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. Not softer. Decisive. Pack his things. Naomi looked at him in disbelief. No, we are not done talking. You think I'm just going to hand him over? I think this conversation does not end tonight. She stepped between him and the couch. You are not taking my son. Our son. Don't do that. Do what? Say that like it fixes the last 5 years. His eyes darkened. Nothing will fix the last 5 years. That, at least, was true. He glanced toward the window where his men stood as silhouettes beyond the glass. Then back to her. You have until morning. To do what? To decide whether we do this with some dignity or none. Naomi stared at him. Is that a threat? It is reality. He moved past her, not touching, never touching, and stopped near the door. For one strange second, he looked less like a conqueror than a man standing in the wreckage of an answer he had wanted for too long. Then he left. His men remained outside. Of course they did. Night dropped heavily over the apartment complex. Alicia came down furious and frightened, and full of questions Naomi could barely answer. The sisters argued in whispers while Jaden, exhausted by confusion he did not understand, eventually fell asleep on the couch with one small hand curled around his crayon drawing. The same drawing. Daddy. Naomi sat beside him and brushed the hair off his forehead. Outside, headlights glowed through the blinds. One SUV in front, another down the block. Men stationed like a warning around a life she had once believed too small to be found. Alicia paced. Call the police. And say what? Naomi asked hollowly. That the father I hid from my child for 5 years is outside with men who can cross borders like they're stepping over puddles? You can't let him take Jaden. Naomi looked at her sleeping son and felt terror split into pieces inside her. Fear of losing him. Fear of fighting wrong. Fear that Soo-hyun could offer the boy parts of himself Naomi had no right to erase. Fear that every choice from this point forward would cost something she could not afford. I know, she whispered. Alicia knelt in front of her. Then run again. Naomi looked toward the window. Some part of her knew that was no longer possible. Running had worked when she was a pregnant student with no attachments and no witnesses. Now there was a child, school records, legal identities, a world of systems that made disappearance harder and pursuit easier. And worse than all of that, there was the truth she had spent years refusing to touch. She was not only afraid of Soo-hyun. She was afraid of what happened if Jaden loved him. Afraid of what happened if she remembered how. Near midnight, Alicia finally dozed in a chair. The apartment was dim except for the kitchen light Naomi had left on out of habit. Jaden's breathing was soft. The city outside had quieted. Then Naomi's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her stomach dropped. She opened the message. He's not just here for the boy. He's here because he never stopped looking for you. Naomi read it twice. Then a third time. Her hands began to shake. She stood and walked to the window with slow, careful steps, as if moving too quickly would make the world worse. She pulled one blind aside, just enough to see the street below. One of the black SUVs was still parked under the street lamp. And beside it, alone, stood Kang Soo-hyun. Not on the phone, not giving orders, not pacing, just standing there in the golden wash of the streetlight, looking up at her window like a man who had finally found the one place in the world he had never stopped trying to reach. Naomi let the blind fall. Behind her, Jaden shifted in his sleep and hugged the crayon drawing closer. A child who wanted his father. A man who had found his son. A woman caught between the safest lie she had ever told and the most dangerous truth she had ever loved. And none of them had any idea that the hardest part was only beginning. Because Kang Soo-hyun had not crossed an ocean just to claim blood. He had come for the boy. But maybe, in some buried, unforgivable part of his heart, he had also come for the only woman who had ever made him feel like there might have been another life for him after all. What happens next will change everything. If you need part 2, subscribe to Afro-Korea Ruthless Love Stories right now. Like this video, comment, and tell us whether Naomi was right to run. Share this story with someone who loves ruthless romance and impossible choices. And check out the other videos on the channel while you wait for part 2 on March 27, 2026.